I met a business owner that puts every business expense on a card that earns 1% cash back. And I was like, I'm not saying you need to go open 14 credit cards and kind of play the game to the level I do, but there are pretty straightforward ways as a business owner to get 2, maybe even 2.6% cash back on almost everything you spend money on. And so if you're not at least getting 2%, that's easy.
I'm Larry Sprung, your host for the Mitlin Money Mindset and founder and wealth advisor of Mitlin Financial. Today's guest is Chris Hutchins, creator and host of the popular All the Hacks podcast. Chris is a master of optimization and a true life hacker. Through All the Hacks, he brings valuable insights on everything from saving money to maximizing travel points to unlocking strategies for a richer life experience. With his background as a venture capitalist and a lifelong optimizer, Chris has developed a knack for uncovering the best tips and tools to live life more fully and efficiently. Today, we're going to dive into some of Chris's favorite hacks, hear about his journey, and discover ways to apply his wealth of knowledge to our everyday lives. Well, I am super excited today to have Chris Hutchins, the creator and the host of the All the Hacks podcast. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, as am I. And I've been following you, following your podcast, did a lot of research about you. But listen, I'm always fascinated by the entrepreneurial journey, and we're going to spend a lot of time on what you're doing today, the All the Hacks podcast. But before we jump into there, can you share with our listeners a little bit about your background, your entrepreneurial journey to launching the show?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how far back to go, but I think I never knew what I wanted to do in life. And so when I graduated from college, I just kind of like went into the default path. I asked people, what's the best job? And people said, oh, investment banking and management consulting. So I went there, and it wasn't until I realized that you could work in technology that led me out to Silicon Valley and to work in startups and various entrepreneurial endeavors for the better part of probably 10 years. And that included a stint in venture capital, investing in startups. And then when I was working at the last company, it was a company called Wealthfront, I just had this idea to start a podcast on the side. I guess that was my kind of pandemic side project, and it just worked, and people were excited, and I just kind of ran with it. And who knew that years later it would be my full-time job, my wife's full-time job, and we'd have a team.
Amazing. Now, my understanding is like this is not your first entree per se into, entrepreneurialism, if you will, right? My understanding is this dates way back, even well into college, right? Because I've heard you share that in boarding school, to afford pizza, you ordered a whole pie, you'd sell off the slices to make money so you could eat for free. How did that role and those things in your life that you did, how did that play into your current, hacking mastery? Was that vitally important to where you are now?
I think I just always had this perspective, and I honestly don't know where it came from, of you don't have to sacrifice. So it's like, oh, I really want to go to concerts. And this was before even high school, but I didn't have money. So what if I started like a magazine and I could go as someone in the press, right? When I was in high school at boarding school, you're right. I was like, I wanted to order pizza, but I didn't have the money to buy pizza every night. So I just sell it by the slice and eat, my profit per se. And so it just kind of continued and continued. Like, there has to be a way, if you dig hard enough and try hard enough, to find a way to make almost anything possible at a much lower or non-existent cost. And, that just has evolved to a podcast and a mode of operation that is kind of the core of everything I do.
Yeah. And your podcast, All the Hacks, has over 1 million listeners. Not download, million listeners. That's pretty powerful. How did the podcast all come to be? And, secondarily, obviously you're bought into this medium. Why do you think the medium itself is so powerful and such a powerful channel?
So how did it come to be? is, a long process, right? To start a podcast, it's kind of hard to get out there. Emailed everyone I knew. And I think the core insight that I'll apply to why it grew the way it did is that there are so many podcasts that focus on a particular topic and they attract an audience that's really excited about that topic. But there are a lot of topics where people are interested, but not interested at the level that they want to hear about it every week. And so a lot of my audience loves really optimizing their health, but not to the point that they want to listen to 3 hours of a Huberman Lab every single week. And that's not to say there aren't people that want that, but to reach an audience of people that don't want, hundreds of hours a year of a specific topic is tough unless you go wide. Now, the downside, obviously, of going wide is that it's hard to be known for anything. And so I think the fact that I could layer the optimization and hacking framework to give a broad kind of identity to a lot of topics, I think just spoke to a lot of people, because I can't tell you how many people I know that are excited to optimize their, credit card rewards, but don't want to listen to a travel and credit card optimization podcast every single week or twice a week because it's too much. Right. And why do I love the medium? I think for me, I'm in my early 40s, have kind of held professional jobs. My wife has as well. I'd put us in this, category of people with a little bit of disposable income trying to think about the right ways to spend it. And that audience is just so squarely a podcast audience. Podcasting, our listeners skew a little older, a little more professional, a little higher income than almost every other newsletter, YouTube, every audience, Instagram, social media. And so for me, I love the audience because most of the people in the audience are like me. And right. So I can speak very naturally. For me to win on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram, I probably have to be a person that is not me. And so I love the fact that me and my audience are kind of one with each other. And I've had a few chances to meet my audience in person. And I'm like, oh, like we could be friends. And many of them that I've met in person, we are friends. And so I love the medium because of that. And it's certainly harder to grow. But, if you're doing anything that's interesting to people who have full-time jobs, make full-time salaries, are a little bit older, dealing with the time constraints of having children and figuring out life, it's a great medium because you could throw it in your ears and you don't have to be sitting in front of a screen. You can be, driving your kids to school, walking the dog, cooking dinner, all that kind of stuff.
So what came first? Did you say to yourself, hey, I want to have a podcast, and think about how, what area you're going to talk about? Or was it one of those things that you love the hacks, you love doing that yourself, so you're like, hey, I'm going to launch a podcast around this because it resonates with me, and I think that there's a lot of people that are interested to hear about this?
So I'd been thinking about starting a podcast for a while, and credit to a friend of mine, I was on his podcast as a guest, much like we are doing right now. And he really wanted to nudge me in the direction of actually doing the thing that I'd said I wanted to do for a while. And so he basically said, hey, why don't you tell my audience about your podcast? And I was kind of forced in that moment to kind of commit publicly to doing it, which was awesome. It really kind of allowed me to do all the things I'm doing now. So big credit to him for that. But I think obviously the personality traits had existed for a while. I'd been a guest on a handful of shows talking about them. But the more I kind of thought about the mediums that I liked, I realized I'd probably tried to post on social media, multiple stints. I'd started a blog, multiple stints. I'd had a newsletter, and the podcast was the first thing that it just felt so natural that by the time I launched it, I was like, this is the right medium for me.
Amazing. And, listen, we can't be lost on the fact that you've had some, amazing guests on all the hacks. And, one of the things that I treasure from having guests like you on our show here is, the amount of knowledge and learning that I get from the guests, and diving more and deeper into their stories. So what's one of the most powerful things that you've learned from one of your amazing guests?
This is tough, right? I've now done somewhere on the order of 200 and something episodes. I think we're at 203 publicly. We probably recorded 210. Narrowing it down to just one is obviously always difficult, but there was a moment where I feel like after an interview, so much changed in my life. And it was after talking to a guy named Bill Perkins, who wrote a book called Die with Zero. And
Yeah.
despite that I'd read the book, there's something about hearing him talk. And, definitely if you go listen to that episode, maybe don't listen in front of your kids. He uses a little bit of language, but like to just kick the message in a way that just reading it didn't do. And the basic lesson is we have all this money that we're trying to save and grow and build and, increase our wealth, but at what cost? And is the goal really just to Scrooge McDuck yourself to a way where you have piles of cash? Or is it to be a little bit more intentional about what you do with your money, where you put it, how you use it? And it just made me realize that the goal of accumulating money for the goal of accumulating money was just not the end goal. And so I remember right after that moment, my wife and I were talking, and we'd normally thought about things as like, oh, what's our target for getting our net worth to this next milestone? And I was like, I don't know if that milestone matters. Like maybe the fact that we are at the time late 30s and, have the ability to travel and run. And like, there's so many things we can do that when I look at my parents' generation, they can't do, right? They can't go on a nonstop trip in certain places. Their health is, not where mine is. And maybe this is a year to spend more than, saving so that in retirement we have more, because there are a lot of things that you might want to do that when you're 65, you just can't do.
Right.
And so having money then just doesn't help you like it does now. And so I don't know, it just really flipped things on my head. And if anyone is curious about that, go check out that episode. You could probably just search Bill Perkins, All the Hacks.
Yeah, I will totally check that out because I did listen to the audiobook, and it does provide a lot of perspective and different views. And, it's one of the things we try to focus on here at Mitlin Finance. We talk about the joy journey, right? That money is a tool to be used for joyful events. And, some of the things are very similar in terms of, like you said, you're as healthy as you're going to be today, right? Chances are you're not going to be as healthy as the years go by. And that money may not be able to be even spent for those joyful events if you wait that long. So it's powerful stuff. Powerful stuff.
Yep.
And you often remind people that hacks aren't always easy, right? They sound easy, but they're not always easy. What do you mean by that?
The name of the podcast, All the Hacks, has I have a lot of feelings. And in one hand, I love the name because it so simply explains a lot of things and it brings people in. On the other hand, I don't want everyone to think that there's just a hack for everything. And sometimes the hack is a change in mindset that might make it easier and sometimes harder to do things. And so there's a lot of people that in health say, oh, here's a great hack. Go get a cold plunge. Go do these things. If you're not eating healthy and exercising, the cold plunge, the sauna, like a lot of these, like the supplement aren't probably really the biggest levers for you to pull in your health. And so the hack might be actually realizing what the 80-20 is in a lot of these areas of your life, even if they're harder. And so I want people to realize that maybe it's figuring out a new way to gamify a very hard thing, but it's not necessarily just going to be a magic pill that fixes everything. So for me with health, it's like, maybe it's scheduling your workouts. Maybe it's finding a new type of workout. Maybe it's finding a person to work out with. Maybe it's hiring a personal trainer. Now, the hack might be if you're hiring a personal trainer and you're working out at home, you can hire someone to FaceTime with you, right? And you can hire that person in the Bay Area, or you can hire that person in India. And there's this app that I think is called Fitter, and I've only done one session, but turns out that the skills you need to be a personal trainer and motivate someone to work out are not uniquely skills that only someone in your local geography has. And so, yeah, it's still hard to get up and work out and go to the gym and do all of that. But if you want to find motivation, maybe there's a way you could cut the cost of that motivation by 90%. And so it might be easy to cut the cost, but you still got to work out. And so there's not a hack for everything.
Imagine a relationship where financial conversations don't feel stressful, but actually bring you joy. We've designed a guide to help you have positive, meaningful money conversations with your partner. This isn't just another budgeting tool, it's a roadmap for building trust and connection. So if you're ready to start a joyful money journey with your partner, go to mitlin.us/couplesjoy and download your free guide. Transform your financial future together starting today. Yeah. And I guess you got to find which hack you're going to get the most value add from is what you're saying because like you said if you're not fit eating right but just hop into a cold plunge every day, that's not going to move the needle as much as doing the former as you said.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point. So, one of the things is that a lot of the folks that we serve here at Mitlin and those who listen to the podcast are business owners. So I'd like to share maybe a hack with them. What are some of your best hacks for those that might own a business?
I've got two, and they're a little bit counter to each other. So, on one hand, I would say two quick things that I meet business owners that aren't doing often are dialing in and making sure that all of the cash they have, if they have some, is earning interest. All of, if you're paying any interest on loans, that it's earning the least amount. And if you're spending any money on credit cards, you're getting the most amount. And so just dialing those three knobs in is interesting because I met a business owner that puts every business expense on a card that earns 1% cash back. And I was like, I'm not saying you need to go open 14 credit cards and kind of play the game to the level I do, but there are pretty straightforward ways as a business owner to get 2, maybe even 2.6% cash back on almost everything you spend money on. And so if you're not at least getting 2%, that's easy. If you have a meaningful amount of cash in the bank and you're not putting it in some high yield money market treasury fund kind of option, then you're probably earning 0 to 0.01, like 0.01%, and you could be earning, let's say, 4+%.
Right.
And then if you're borrowing money at like 20%, then this is probably none of those tips are for you. You should focus on paying it down. But there are options, whether it's a 0% APR card, whether it's different small business loans where you could cut that down. Like if you could do the 80-20 of cut each of those down, but not necessarily try to focus on the perfect optimal outcome, I think that's pretty meaningful. But then taking that too far is the other advice. I was talking to a business owner who'd heard me talk about credit cards and was like, well, I think if I get these 5 different things, I can dial all this in. And I was like, yes, but how much work is that going to be? And if you just spent time trying to grow your business's revenue or, increase the efficiency of your business so that you spend less, would that have a bigger impact? And he was like, yeah, I don't know why I'm even trying to go for the final 5% of optimal credit card points. So I think the 80-20 comes back to play here really hard. It's find the big things that can move the needle that are pretty simple and then focus on your business, because chances are if you could double the revenue of your business, it'll probably exceed any benefit you'd get from eking out a little bit more on your credit card. But if you're earning 1%, 1.5%, 0%, paying with a debit card, you're just leaving money on the table.
Yeah, I agree. And I find it so fascinating that people in general, right, with their cash balances personally in the bank, they're typically shopping and making sure that they're getting at least some kind of reasonable rate or competitive rate. But when it comes to their business balances, they're not as worried about it. They don't pay as much attention to that.
The one argument I'll say is I have been in a couple business situations where liquidity has been a challenge. So a lot of the business banks, they might earn interest, but you have to move it into like a treasury account or something like that. And then when you need the money, it takes 2 or 3 days to get the access to the money. And I think in our personal life, sometimes things are just a little bit more predictable. And in business life, you're like, oh, wow, I need this $15,000 and I can't get it for 3 days. Like this is a problem.
Right.
But there are a handful of banks, like I think Grasshopper and Meow are 2 options where they just have high yield checking. And so if maybe it's not going to be the full 4+%, maybe it's only 2 or 3%. But if you could find something for your kind of day-to-day operations that's checking or savings, where you should have kind of instant liquidity, even if it's not the full percent, 4+%, and then put whatever kind of reserves in something that earns the maximum, great, that's fine. And look, if to meet your business's liquidity needs, you need to put $5,000 in a checking account. This goes back to the other thing. What's 4% of $5,000? Well, it's about $200 a year, and you're probably going to pay, taxes on that interest. So what is it? $150 a year?
Right.
Like, I don't want to get too caught up in trying to maximize every last dollar. So put whatever you need in a checking account that gives you liquidity and easy access. But if that number is $150,000 for your business, maybe try to find out if there's a better option. But if that number is $5,000, go worry about the business.
Great point. So, I've gotten into, let's call it some interesting conversations/debates online when I talk about the benefits of using credit cards. Because I'm one of those people that basically puts everything on the card and then pays it off at the end of the month. Why are credit card points? Because I think people fail to understand this. And to your point, you talked about the 1% versus, really juicing that up significantly more, or even just getting that 2.7%. Why are, credit card points so valuable?
I think there's probably two reasons. And I've changed a little bit of my perspective here recently. There's why are airline miles and hotel points valuable? I'll answer that question first so that I can go back and answer your question. So when you want to book flights or hotel rooms, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, the price in miles and points is not as dynamic as the price in dollars. Now, in some airlines, Southwest, JetBlue, this is not the case. But there are times where a $5,000 flight might be 50,000 points, and there are times where a $500 flight might be 50,000 points. And so because there's the opportunity to get outsized value using airline points, mostly for last minute, really expensive domestic flights or premium cabins in business class, or maybe in long international flights to kind of obscure places that have really expensive fares. Like in a lot of those circumstances, your miles can be worth a lot. And the same similarly goes with hotels. You're probably not going to get that great of a deal staying at the Best Western. But if you were trying to get, an overwater bungalow in Bora Bora or the Maldives or some kind of like really aspirational honeymoon destination or a major metro area, like during a prime time, we stayed at a Hyatt in Paris during the Olympics. Like you can get some amazing deals. So that's why I think miles and points are valuable. The interesting thing is, nowadays, most airlines and hotel groups sell those miles and points all the time and regularly go on sale. Some of them as often as every other week, some 5 times a year. And so I want to point out that there are circumstances where taking advantage of the fact that points and miles can be really, really valuable doesn't require you to have them at all. And my wife and I stayed at this amazing resort this summer in Mallorca, Spain. And the resort was like $3,000 a night, but it was also available with Hilton points. And it was 130,000 Hilton points a night. And we already had those points from, signing up from a few Hilton cards. But Hilton was selling those points on the day we booked the reservation for half a cent each. So you could buy Hilton points for effectively a price of $650 a night. So even if you didn't have Hilton points, even if you didn't even have a Hilton account, you could create one and buy points for $650 a night and stay at a hotel that was $3,000 a night. So that's, I think, like why points are so valuable. But I want to separate that from the fact that if you were using a cashback card, you might have actually earned more cash back to be able to buy those points from Hilton and stay at that hotel than if you were using a Hilton card to earn those Hilton points. And so I think it's important to earn something more than, 1.99%, because I'll kind of say 2% is the floor,
Right.
just because you're leaving money on the table, right? If you're spending money and you're not earning something, you're just paying more for whatever you're buying or spending money on. Now, if they offer a cash discount or they charge a fee to use your credit card, usually those things aren't worth it. I'd rather take the discount or not pay the fee. But if there's no fee, I would rather use my card. But I used to say, go get the points and then, you can get all this great value booking flights and hotel rooms and that kind of stuff. Now I kind of lean towards, if you want to play the game, you can get a lot of value. And if you don't want to play the game, either earn points somewhere where they're easier to redeem for cash if you want, or just earn cash back. And then if you want to play the game, go play the game and you could buy those points, or that kind of thing. So
Right.
I think, Chase and Amex, you could transfer those points to, dozens of airlines and hotel groups. Capital One and Citi are the same, so it gives you a little bit of flexibility, but you can also just go to their travel portal and book a flight and not worry about whether it's available on the day you want. So I do think points give you a little bit of flexibility, but ultimately, usually if you're accumulating them, you can't use them to pay a bill. So cash back would give you the ultimate flexibility, and now that points go on sale enough, I'd say there's a decent chance you can still get that huge upside without having had to earn the points in the first place.
Good point. Good point. Like it. No pun intended there by points, but yeah. So, thank you for that. And I don't understand why people don't understand them or want to understand them. A lot of people are just anti-credit card, and I'm like, it's really no different. Just charge it and pay it off the next day, and you get the points. There's no
Yes.
disadvantage to doing that. And listen, you've talked about some great places and experiences that you and your family have experienced, even just this year alone in the last couple of minutes. And I'm a big fan of experience over things. What is, or what are, maybe one or two of your best travel hacks in terms of being able to get those experiences? I mean, you shared the one with the Hilton points, which I think is fantastic. I didn't think of that off the top of my head, to kind of compare buying the points versus whether I have them or not. Is there anything else that you could, share top of mind that would be a huge travel hack to allow more experiences like that?
Yeah, I think a couple, and if you're a business owner, when you're traveling, you need to stay in touch probably and be available. And I would say, depending on the cell phone plan you have, it may be wildly cheaper to buy a local SIM card. And now that most new phones have eSIMs, you don't even need to go buy a physical thing. You can just load it on your phone. And so there are a lot of sites like ALO.com, where you could just browse SIM cards. So if you're going to Europe and you have a carrier that charges you $10 a day for international access, you might be able to spend $20 and get, a meaningful amount of data for the entire trip. So, if you're traveling internationally and you don't have T-Mobile or Google Fi or someone that's going to include your international data, it might be a lot cheaper for you to buy data, from another carrier and add it to your same phone and run two plans at the same time, which is totally feasible. Another one is, next time you go on a trip, and this is a challenge, and I'd encourage listeners to send you a note, or me a note, or send us both a note. If you're staying at a hotel, that has nicer rooms, has suites, has that kind of thing, book your hotel directly with the hotel. Don't book it at TripAdvisor or Expedia or any of those sites. Usually, from the hotel's perspective, you end up being like the lowest priority guest. So book directly with the hotel. If they have some kind of loyalty program, sign up for it and email the hotel and say, hey, and you can, if you don't know their email, call the hotel, ask them for an email if you can't find one online, and say, hey, we're staying with you on these dates. Here's, our confirmation. We're really excited. If you're celebrating anything, let them know. And then maybe a couple days before, follow up and say, hey, we're still on track to be here. Really excited. I don't even think you need to ask for anything, but I think I've probably seen a 50% success rate from listeners on getting upgrades, free champagne, dinner, complimentary drinks, free parking, all kinds of perks just from booking directly with the hotel and emailing. And so that's an easy one that hopefully everyone listening can try, sometime in the next few months or the next year. And I'd be surprised if most people didn't see some benefit from doing that, because at the end of the day, hotels are still in the hospitality game and they're still trying to deliver a great experience. So you come back and tell your friends. And so they do try to deliver when they think they have a shot of earning your business. And the more you're booking direct and creating a loyalty program with them, the more they think they have a shot. And the more you're booking everything you do on Expedia, the more they think you're just buying the cheapest thing, and they're probably not going to win you over.
Right. Yeah. Great points. And I've personally experienced that treatment when booking through some of those lower cost providers, and getting the response of, well, you got the room you got because you booked through that provider. It is what it is. So I wholeheartedly agree with you there. Under the who, not how mindset, which is something I subscribe to, right, is figuring out who can take care of this instead of necessarily figuring out how to do it myself. How can those that are overwhelmed by the points game get the most out of their points? Because, I've seen others kind of lay out sometimes charts, sometimes it gets complicated, right? So is there a way to kind of uncomplicate that a little bit and make it easier for those that, don't have the time, effort, or energy to instill in that?
Yeah, I mean, a few years ago, there really wasn't. And now I think, things have gotten a lot easier. And so I would say if you have points in a particular program, United, Delta, Hyatt, Hilton, you don't really have a lot of options for how you use those points. And so the way to make sure you get the most out of them is to just do your searching on those airline websites. So if you have United points, then whenever you're searching, you can toggle between miles and money. And that's the common way. So I'm not going to address that too much because there's kind of really only one way to use your United points, and it's to book a United flight. I would say the way to get the most out of points in general is to be flexible. So if you want your United points to take you on a trip to Europe and you're flexible to go in the summer instead of on July 13th on the nonstop that leaves in the afternoon, you're going to get a lot more options that are probably going to be a better deal. But what's happened in the last few years is there've been a handful of what I'll call like award search tool websites that make it much, much easier to find the best deals. And those deals become even more accessible if you have points that are with a bank like Amex, Chase, Citi, Cap One, now Wells Fargo, because you can transfer them to, a dozen plus airlines. So those sites still work if you just have United points. They're going to be helpful for you to say, hey, I want to go to Europe. I'm flexible when I go. I only have United points. They'll tell you, hey, the best deal is on this day. But if you have Amex points, then it will search and say, hey, well, actually, you could either transfer them to British Airways and book this American Airlines flight, or it might be a better deal to transfer to Air Canada and book this United flight, or transfer to Air France and book this Delta flight or this KLM flight. And you kind of open up the world to every airline, because I'm pretty sure every single one of those financial institutions has at least one airline that you can transfer your points to in each of the major 3 alliances. So you really open yourself up to so many options. But I'd say a couple examples of these sites. One of them is called awardtool.com. One of them is called pointsyeah.com. There are a few other ones. If you want to go further than that, I did an episode on award search tools that you can search for. And I think I put that episode on YouTube where I actually walked through how to use some of those tools. But using those tools will make it much easier for you to find a better deal. And the Points Yeah site has this feature called the Daydream Explorer. And it's like, just show me great deals. Like, I don't even care where I go, but I've got 100,000 Amex points and I'd love to take an awesome trip. Where can I go with 2 people? And it'll kind of come up with ideas. And so the more you're flexible and take advantage of some of these tools to save you time, the better you'll be. And if even that sounds like too much work, then there are things called award booking services. So one I've used a few times is a website called point.me. Okay. And in this case, you'll pay them usually like a $50-ish per person search fee. And then if they find something, you'll pay them, ends up being a total of around $150, $200 a person. And they'll just do everything. You'll say, I have all these points. I want to go on a trip to Europe next summer. Do it all and tell me what to do. And so you've got the option of like, do it yourself, use some of these search tools that might have some restrictions if you don't pay $10 a month, and then pay $200 and have someone completely take it off your plate. And if that sounds like a lot, then I would ask you to at least consider the fact that I've seen circumstances where people get 1 cent per point of value, and I've seen people like myself get 10 cents of value. Sure. And so if you had let's call it 200,000 points to use for a vacation, and you got 1 cent of value per point, your points are gonna replace $2,000 of travel. But if it's 10, it's $20,000 of travel. So if you get an extra $18,000 of travel that the only alternative is to not do, then yeah, it'd absolutely be worth paying someone $200 to figure it out.
Yeah, I pay $400, $500 to figure that out, right? Just makes
Yeah. And
sense.
usually you don't pay the full price unless they find something. And
Right.
so you're really risking $50. So I don't know. It seems to me that if you're not going to go through the work to figure it out, at least go through the work to pay someone else to figure it out.
Great stuff. And we'll have that information in the show notes. And it's been a pleasure having you on, Chris. And these conversations about points, conversations about saving money, conversations around experiences are all things that are joyful to me and joyful to our listeners. And we're all about joy here. So we ask each of our guests the same final question, which is, what did you do today that brought you joy and put you in the right mindset for success?
So I try to wake up early enough that I can knock off all those things that kind of eat at you in the morning. Like, I got to clear out my inbox, or I've got to send this one note or check this one thing before my kids wake up, so that when they're up, before I go to work, I've got a window of time where I'm not distracted and I can just kind of be around and present in their lives, at least while they're at an age where they want to hang out with me. So that is how I usually start my mornings. And yes, getting up early isn't always the most fun, but hanging out with your kids and not feeling distracted is.
Amazing. And I would argue that by you doing what you're doing, chances are it will allow you to have, or allow them to want you to hang out with them longer and later in life, because at least that's been my experience. My kids are now 18 and 21, did something similar with them. And just recently they called us up. They asked us if we wanted, my wife and I, if we wanted to go with them to see Post Malone and Jelly Roll concert. So they're still asking us to hang out with them. They still think we're cool. So keep doing that stuff. And I think you'll have a similar experience too.
Awesome. I hope you're right.
Yeah. So, Chris, it's been a pleasure having you on. I really appreciate the time. We're going to have all of your information in the show notes. But if people want to learn more about you, connect with you, learn more about, or listen to the All the Hacks podcast, what's the easiest and the best place for them to do that?
Yeah, I mean, if you're listening to a podcast now, you could just search All the Hacks. Anywhere else, you could just search my name, Chris Hutchins, chrishutchins.com. Everything's on there. Only thing I didn't mention is, if you want all the deals I'm finding each week, we have a newsletter where I just send all the most interesting stuff that I've found every week out. So all that's at chrishutchins.com.
Awesome. Well, listen, Chris, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you sharing all your great hacks with our listeners, and enjoy the day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for having me.
I want to thank Chris Hutchins for being a guest on the Mitlin Money Mindset. Chris has shown qualities of being on an entrepreneurial path from a very early age. People love good hacks that make their lives easier, and Chris has become an expert in this area. He has used hacks to help him be successful, and now he has dedicated himself to help others do the same. Chris shares these hacks and some of the best hack creators on his podcast, All the Hacks, to help others experience all the joy of a good hack. Chris Hutchins and All the Hacks podcast can be found across most social media platforms. All the contact information needed to find them can be found in the show notes.